move on with, we're going through those one-time asks. And we are on to the converting signs from battery to solar. I'll let you guys speak on that, whoever would like to.
I'm going to start off, and we didn't have a long conversation on this, so me and Helen did not connect today. But it's, correct me if I'm wrong, it's my understanding that these signs are up for replacement in a year or two anyways.
That's correct.
So we'd like to withdraw this request, and as we renew and refresh those signs based on life cycle, we'll just buy them
Solar.
solar.
Okay.
Yep.
Why, what's the life, those ones seem to work when they're charged, right?
Well,
What's,
that's the issue.
That's the issue is depending on the weather
yeah.
and the temperature, it affects the battery life and the length of the charge, obviously. So we were looking at just replacing them with solar, but like as they come due for replacement, then we were looking at just getting a whole new unit because they are, I think they're probably 7 or 8 years now,
Yeah.
roughly. So it just might be more practical just to replace them brand new than.
Instead of trying to.
Yeah.
spin
So
up
we'll
by
keep
solar.
it as is. But, yeah.
But you move those around, don't you?
We can, yeah.
So if you're going to solar, you'll have to be more particular as to where you're placing it.
Oh, not necessarily. You just position your solar panel.
To the sun.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next one, which is the infrastructure funding contributions.
So again, it looks like a big number overall. Even though the town's putting in roughly $1.3 million annually for infrastructure renewal, it's not adequate to maintain the infrastructure in a good state of repair. You may remember, even though the November 17th administration provided 2 slides, one saying, the good news is the value of the town assets has been increasing, so there has been positive reinvestment into the community. The bad news is there's still degradation of the remaining life of the assets. So that's a common problem among all municipalities. It's nothing, High Prairie town is not an anomaly there. There's lots of people in the same rowboat. Some are rowing in different directions, of course, but there's lots of people in that same situation. So for now, it's there as a flag for, we don't lose track of it. And the message from administration is any opportunity to reallocate funds in the budget. Recommendation from administration will not be using that to mitigate the tax rate increase. It's to provide sustainability for the asset base that will need to be refreshed. There will be funding requests and significant issues that the Joint Recreation Committee is dealing with. There'll be other community groups coming in actually this week to talk about improvements they'd like to see done in some of the facilities. Those pressures aren't going to go away, but we know for one thing, everything's going to be a year older next year than it is today. So that's it. The other point I just want to make is the province in their wisdom has decided and has cut infrastructure funding for the town of High Prairie from roughly 700,000 a year to roughly 350 a year. So there's been a 50% reduction over the last 4 years in funding from the provincial level. Not similar decreases from the federal level, but a level playing field from the federal government in terms of gas tax, where there hasn't been any significant moderation in that gas tax funding for a long period of time. So the core funding is still there, but again, given the assets the municipality operates, nowhere near the amount.
Is that MSI?
or is that just?
Gas tax.
It's both. MSI has been cut in half, and gas tax has been holding its own, but not increasing.
Judy?
So I'm gonna rehash this because the natural gas line, is that not considered infrastructure?
Yes, it is.
So why would we not take this 40,000 from that fund instead of adding it as an extra?
We were looking at taking it from the restricted surplus.
Right. So just one point of
So-
clarification on that, if I could, through the chair. Yes, it's considered infrastructure. Is it eligible for MSI funding? No,
Not capital.
because it doesn't meet the distribution class the province will fund on their MSI. Again, the gas utility at the municipal level is an anomaly in the province, and any gas co-ops will have problems sustaining themselves long-term because of the capital requirements for the system. So that's a challenge. There may be other opportunities, but I'll deal with those in camera related to the gas utility. But again,
It's just, I'm trying,
Trying to, because this gas line is part of our infrastructure, and if we've got a fund set aside for infrastructure, why are we not taking it out of that fund? Why are we adding it as a extra ask? Do you
Well,
know
we-
what I'm saying?
if I could, through the chair,
Yeah.
we are taking it out of that fund, but we still need council approval to budget for it and withdraw the funds from that fund,
oh, okay.
right?
So this is, okay,
So there's still an approval process that council,
okay.
so any contributions and or withdrawals from any of the town's
Yeah.
reserves require
Yeah.
council resolution or specific authorization in a budget.
No,
So
I-
that's what we're doing through the budget deliberations.
Okay, so at this point, nothing's really needed on that. We know that we have a infrastructure deficit that we gotta continue to look at, but we're not going to be changing that at this point. So move on to tree inventory study.
Now, this one is, if you thought some of the other ones were convoluted, this one is very convoluted. So we started, as I may have mentioned, on the 17th, discussing the capital requirements related to the boom truck. And that led to numerous other issues that council members have alerted to tonight. Well, aren't you reviewing this? Aren't you reviewing that? Yes, we are. So the bucket truck's a good example. So we had a discussion on the utilization of the bucket truck. What do we use it for? Why do we need a bucket truck? Can we contract the service? Can we do this? Can we do that?
Why can't a genie lift?
Right, so there's all those things, but fundamentally, one of the drivers is, town used to have an arborist on staff, we don't have an arborist anymore. There's some issues related to the tree canopies, tree maintenance, all that stuff related to the trees. You may find this, trees are part of our inventory system and part of our asset base. We have done no comprehensive study about the state of that inventory system, so to speak. So before we run out and recommend the council we buy a new truck, we want to do an evaluation of our potential service options related to the tree inventories and the tree assets we have in town. So that's the major part of this initiative, is really to talk about doing a tree inventory, tree assessment, getting back some data on whether we're planting too much, whether our loss rate is too high versus our planting rate, what would it cost if we contracted out the service, all those type of questions before we run out and recommend the council we buy a truck specifically for, tree maintenance is a big part of the component of the use of that current apparatus. That current apparatus is at its end of life cycle. So there is some urgency to sort of wrap various components into a package and do the analysis to come back with a recommendation to council, not only on the tree stuff, but also on the capital needs related to not only trees, but flag poles, for instance. Our flag poles we have to use a bucket truck to lower and raise a flag. Well, maybe we put in appropriate equipment we don't have to do that. And it's relatively low cost for flags, you know what I mean, flag poles. It is a cost, but there's maybe some uses that we're using equipment for because we're not changing our processes and practices that are,
But we just bought a brand new ladder truck, fire truck, for the amount of time we do that.
yeah, and that's, it doesn't rate for safety concerns. Again,
Yeah.
when you're doing any of that, I have significant concerns related to some of the equipment. And, you know, we have an obligation to our employees and the like to provide a safe working environment, blah, 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 blah. So, again, training, if we're putting staff in bucket trucks, we better make sure that they've got proper training in all those areas. Well, you know, so it's a bigger picture, that's all I'm saying, related to this.
It's cheaper to rent.
You know, but part of that option is potentially renting, get a boom lift, you know, phone a friend, borrow the equipment, you know, that type of stuff. So that will all be part of it, but there's still an issue of what do we do with the trees and some fundamental concerns with the tree inventory system and the availability or potential non-availability of capital equipment to do any of the work.
Go ahead, Teresa.
Where did, so where did you get the 25,000? Like, where did the amount, or what did you kind of base the 25 on there? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's just, there's a few companies that do that for sure, so there
Right.
might be
Yeah,
competitive numbers for that, I'm just
and
thinking,
that,
so.
that is the ballpark number. I've
Yeah.
undertaken similar studies.
Okay,
And based on the scope, we can tailor the scope of the study to the budget. That's
right,
what I'm saying.
okay, okay.
So, I understand you want to find out about the trees, but you want to just, the trees affect the
equipment.
the equipment, like the boom truck. So but the trees, it's how we're using them to trim the trees? Is that what you're trying to
And
find out?
the current-
How much do we trim them and how much are we gonna need to trim them?
Yeah, so the boom truck, if we continue our standard practice and just buy another boom truck, we're talking about a couple $100,000 expenditure. So how do we evaluate, you know, cost versus rent versus other mechanisms of delivering not deteriorating services relating to that whole spectrum of trees, Christmas lights, / the other component.
Yeah.
So,
Flagpole. So, yeah, I'm just thinking in my head in terms of the staff trimming trees. I do see them occasionally, but it's usually only 2 or 3 days in the year that I see them trimming trees, but maybe it's more. That's just what I've seen. I don't usually see a lot of that going on. So I'm going, boy, that's a lot to find out how much we need to trim.
No, again, the tree inventory is, it's a mixed bag, that's what I'm saying. The tree inventory and evaluation of that can be a standalone project. All I'm saying is, if council does support that study, it will also provide supplementary information for this piece of equipment that
Okay.
may need quick replacement. So even though it's not been on a capital forecast, well, maybe it has, but currently it's not in the 2023 capital project list, and it may have to be, unless, anyways, the equipment's nearing its life end.
Yeah.
So it may be academic because it may not be operational. So I just want to give council that heads up that,
So what would we get out of this tree asset program other than, I'm just trying to see what we get for 25,000. I understand they'll tell us where the trees are, or what kind of health they're in, which, Okay, that's good, but
Right.
what else would we get from that?
You know, the species that we should be planting in town, the relative cost of doing planting. So if you're interested in maintaining the same canopy coverage in town, what's the level of tree planting that has to happen? Do you want to see your current tree canopy dissipate? So it's that,
Yep, I want the tree line pulled back so people can see the town.
you know, it's that type of analysis. At the end of the day, you know, from a staff perspective, again, this is preliminary work that we've been doing at the leadership team is, you're telling me that this is the expectation of council related to tree trimming. If we're gonna do it and continue to do it, is there alternatives than spending a couple $100,000 on a boom truck? Can we manage it in a different way? At the end of the day, honestly don't know what our exposure is related to the broader tree or whether that's a priority of council or not, you know?
So where does ADCO come into this? Do they not trim the trees that are affecting their power lines and
Yep.
light poles? Okay, so keep that in mind. So ADCO's is responsible for, let's say, half, right? So how many trees does the town actually own?
Well, without a tree inventory study, I can't tell you that.
And also the health, I guess, is the main
I
thing,
can't
right?
tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what that's what this would
But
provide,
think about
right?
this, how many of those trees are on private lots, and how much does ADCO actually have a responsibility for? We're gonna spend $25,000?
There's quite a few that are elms and they are on, the town properties. And
Yeah.
there has been, concern that with the age of the trees, of the safety of some of the residences. And, cause they're so big, they could reach the residences in there. That would give a really good inventory and be a little bit more proactive than when one all of a sudden smashes down on vehicles, which I've seen 3 branches go on my street alone in the past.
So will this tree study tell us the impact they are having on our infrastructure?
In which
The roots
Root
go-
damage.
Root systems in our infrastructure, like,
well, again, I'm not an arborist, but I imagine the people undertaking the study will be looking at what trees are most appropriate for an urban environment to reduce the risk of, you know, intrusive root invasion, blah, 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 and make recommendations on, these are the species that the town should be advocating for. And, you know, maybe you should do some advocacy to the residents if they're putting in trees on their private property. These would be better selections than others. You know, people like the aesthetics of certain trees, but they may be adverse to urban infrastructure. So it's all those type of things that
Okay.
we'd get recommendations back on.
What's our liability if a tree blows over and lands on it? Like, is that our responsibility? Like, I don't.
It's a complex issue. Bottom line is, we're insured, the householder's insured. What the insurers will look at is whose property was the tree on?
It was on Town Boulevard.
It's on
That's
town
ours.
boulevards, it's town liability. So,
So
and the
we
same
need-
thing with, you know, invasion of roots. Where are the roots oriented, like where's the intrusion coming from? If it's from a tree on town property, yes, the insurer would be looking for the town to compensate. But that's generally all done through the insurers, right? It's nothing that would be managed at political or administrative level per se. So those are, you know, the responsibility and sharing of liability is really we don't have any say. We've, you know, retained an insurer on this basis to represent the interest of the town, and it's their call.
Okay, so we've got the request for 25,000, you're thinking out of unrestricted?
Correct, and, you know, again, right now I'm just looking for the appetite of council, but, the discussions we've had over the last week or two at the extended leadership meeting is, well, the equipment may fail anyways, so, just to give you,
Genie lifts everything, that's okay.
you know, just a heads up, that
It's at its end, yeah. Okay, so let's go around, just get a bit of a feel. Counselor Tanaka, what are you thinking on this one?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, I can understand where you're coming from in terms of trying to figure out, okay, we have this trees, we have this maintenance of these trees, what do we need for equipment to do those trees? I mean, we have some, especially on your street, Teresa, those trees are designated heritage sites or whatever, because they even have a plaque on them that says that, so, though, I mean, part of me is liking the idea of figuring out what it is that we have and moving forward on how to keep what we have. 25,000, I don't know, it seems a little on the high side, but I don't know.
Okay.
So, I mean, I could live with that.
And I'm a yes. I'm hoping it'll come in a little bit less than that, but I'm a yes on that.
I like the idea of it, but I'm wondering if there's a grant of some sort that we can get, because we do have those heritage trees and this, you know, try to leverage some of that. You know, hey, we need to know and see if we can't leverage some money out of some level of government for funding part of it, at least something to keep in the back, you know, back of your head. But yeah, it sounds like it's a one-time ask, and it's gonna determine whether or not we need to buy a piece of equipment that's $200,000 on the low side, and you know, it'll give us an idea as to moving forward. Hopefully, it'll let us know about the infrastructure underneath, and hopefully, we can cut down some of the big branches before they land on Teresa's cat.
Councillor Martins?
So Bill, I understand the intent of this ask. I'm wondering, we've got at least one that I'm aware of, but at least one or two tree arborists or whatever they're called in and around our town. Why can't we call them in for a consultation? I think that we don't need a $200,000 piece of asset. I think we can outsource this. We don't do tree trimming very often. It's not rocket science to understand. These are 50-year-old elms or maples. The roots are certainly, Vern can tell you that. I don't know that we need to incur the expense. I think that a consultation with one or both of our local arborists who, we don't have a large town. We don't have a large town footprint. I'm wondering if we can go the route of a consultation with a company like that and have them do it. And I don't think it'll be anywhere near 25,000. They might do the consultation for nothing if they were going to be awarded the contract to do this annually for us. So I don't know, I just see it as it's a very fancy thing. You say to our ratepayers, we're spending $25,000 to do a tree study. I mean, to tell us what kind of trees to plant in our town. There's a lot of ladies of the church that can tell you that. And I know you want to get very, it's a very formalized study, but I think that the $25,000 can be best spent elsewhere, especially when we have the talent in-house.
I was thinking along the same lines in terms of taking a look at, so when we had an arborist on staff, what was the actual cost of that individual? Knowing that person also did other work, it wasn't his only role. And so sort of taking a look at that, the possibility of bringing in somebody that has that skill, as Councillor Martin was saying, and actually making it a full-time having a position. We need employees right now. And so seeing if there's somebody that can do something along those lines, but it is something that's gonna be, I think that the town, that our residents will have a hard time dealing with paying $25,000 to do a tree study. I know it's needed, but struggling with that. So, right now I'm on the fence, not saying yes or no.
Well, you can't, you
Okay.
gotta get off the fence. Pick a side.
Climb a tree.
Okay.
So, yeah, what they said, but I want to commend you on bringing this to our attention about the tree study, and I get where you're going with that. But again, not only an employee, why couldn't we ask our own staff how often they use this bucket machine and for what? Or ADCO, we're a consumer of ADCO, we're in partnership with them. What do they think? Like, and how much of these trees do they trim? And let's get some more information. I don't wanna keep hashing it out. I'm not for, I can't justify $25,000 for a tree study, but I do appreciate where you're going with this and getting everything, all our inventory. That's my comment.
From my perspective, I'm a little bit there. I just, for 25,000, I just don't know if we'd get enough value out of it from that, like I say, for our ratepayers at this time. I think we could get enough. We have our ex-employee that knows the trees pretty well, that worked here for 25 or 30 years doing that kind of work. He can probably give us a good idea of what's coming up. If we wanted even just to hire someone for where the trees are, do that little inventory work, it seems like a lot of money for that. To get an idea of how much work is going to be to trim the trees, to figure out if it's justifying the boom truck. We got that information already, I think. They've been doing it for years. It's not a start. So from my perspective, I think we can use money here a little better. That's my take on it. So I've got.
And just to make mention of that, is it a possible, because I think we're kind of all have that question of what are we getting for that money? Is it a possibility that, I don't know how you would pick who it would be, but is there any way somebody could do a presentation? I mean, one of these companies that does this, do a presentation? And I guess another thing too would they give an estimate? I mean, I know they'd have to go out and do the work and they'd have to charge, but is there anything that they would say, okay, the town's this big, it's got so many trees, okay, it would be about, this is ballpark of what it would be. I have a concern with the cost. The cost is a problem for me. I think it's a great idea, but the money is the thing, and that's why I question it kind of too, like, would it really be that much? And I think maybe we're lacking a little bit of information, maybe, of what they actually do, like a company would do for us with that. That's just where I'm kind of have my questions there.
I wanted to go back to Councillor Wakel's comment, and given that we do have trees that have been identified as heritage trees, that there's got to be a opportunity to get a grant because my thinking is for that, especially for that street, is we need to know long term what the impact is as those trees continue to grow together. And it's awesome. I've heard people talk from out of town talk about that street specifically, right? And the beauty that it brings and everything else. So it's something we want to maintain, but at the same time, what's gonna be the impact, and are we gonna have the knowledge of how we need to allow that to continue? So,
Okay, I've had a couple, I'm not sure, I'm sort of on the fence or on the limb. And a couple that have said yes, and a couple, I think 1, 2, 3 that have said no. So we're sort of all over the map on this one.
Well, for this one, can we find out if there is some sort of provincial grant that we can get our paws on, especially to deal with the heritage trees, and see if we can stretch it out a little bit?
Send the library or the museum, get the museum to look into it.
Well, I mean, it's looking for a grant specifically for this.
Yeah, but it's a history thing.
They're planted in '67. They're centennial trees. So, and they have been designated as as heritage trees. That's not something that the museum would, I mean, that's the history of it, and you can find articles about it, I guess, the planting of them, but what I'm looking for is something from the government to help support that. And that's more of a grant thing. Does the county still have their dedicated grant person?
Yep.
Can we maybe make use of them a little bit in this regard?
I'm sure they would offer help if we wanted them to look, yep.
Yeah, because I really think that given the status of those trees, there's gotta be something.
Canadian Tree Fund,
Well, there you go.
promoting and funding arboricultural research.
There you go.
And it's not just that street, I mean, there's, we're making it sound like it's just like one block or something. I mean, it's much larger than that, and on the streets to the north, like 2, 3 streets north of Main Street Highway, like there is trees that have been maybe not there as long, but they're still fair size, and they're different species, so, yeah, I think I mean, we're talking about the heritage trees for sure, I mean, by far, but there is, I mean, there's much more than that in town as well, right?
So perhaps I can just throw this out. Again, the 25,000 is just a number that's out there. We can go to the marketplace and ask for options and give us, low package, medium package, and full-blown package. Yeah, this is a fairly full-blown package at 25,000, but, is there an appetite to set a lower limit and have administration do that extra work or not?
I would say at least, yeah, and with some clear deliverables to what we would get, because right now I'm still, it's kind of a little fuzzy. We can get an inventory of how many elms and where they're at. That's great, but do we really need that? It would be nice to know, but not in my mind, and need to know. But they would tell us how long these trees are going to last. If they're going to start, we should be starting to take them down because they're at the end of their life cycle. I don't know how long elm trees live, right? How close are they to having to be taken down for safety purposes? That kind of stuff might be good. But again, what would they tell us?
Well, because we certainly don't want to end up with the same situation that we had in the park over here, where we had a whole row of trees that gave great shade, and they did a core sample, and it failed because there was no core, so we had to take them all down. And for years, they kept a cross-section of one of them in the office, because people would come in, why'd you take all those trees down? Put your hand through it. Like, there was literally nothing there. So, yeah, something to let us know. I don't know. I know Kelly worked here for a long time. I don't know if he was an arborist the whole time. That might have been when we sent him off to school to become one, because of that incident.
But maybe the
Question should be, can you justify $25,000? That's the question. Instead of, like I said,
it's nice to know, we appreciate you doing the inventory, but can you justify $25,000 out of the budget for this?
Okay, I'm not trying to be difficult. Again, as the administrator, I'm saying staff are advising me that there's potential health and safety risk related to tree inventory. And it could be things falling and risk of being injured in the equipment. So we need a process to decide if we're gonna be in that business or not in the business, and then afford council the opportunity to say, if we are, here's a way of delivering the service. Right?
But couldn't you go to an arborist and say, how much would you charge to do what we normally do in a year?
That's correct, and that's part of what this is. As I alluded to, we also used the truck for raising and lowering flags.
Okay.
And we also use it for Christmas lights.
But that's not gonna give you that data for justifying or not justifying the truck, because you have to build in the flag costs differently, you have to build in, you know,
That's
how would
correct,
we do it?
but right now, operationally, the staff do not have the data to say, one, what even they're currently doing, and two, what needs to be done. So, you know, we can't do, we're backlogged by 3 years. Well, is that true or not true? I don't have the data to support it. And we can have these general discussions, but I like to have real data. And I need someone that can provide us with the real data. So that's where I'm coming from. So I can appreciate the cost of the study and the like, but I'm just recommending to council that they don't mitigate and recognize that I'm suggesting there is a higher degree of risk related to this activity than one would casually think there is.
I would say maybe if you can come back with some specifics, and maybe it'll, like you said, the different tiers and what they would cost and what they'd deliver, we can go around, because there is some people on the fence and might go either way, and if we can get some more information, we can decide on that.
Yep.
Okay.
I just know I had to get some trees trimmed because I had some on my own property in the back. One of the bigger lots is, as John knows, and it was, all I'm gonna say is it was extremely pricey. I almost had to get a loan, so it's not cheap to do it, but I mean, you have to, it's gonna, you know, I was worried about my neighbor's house and that, but it's, yeah.
Well, I think that what we
It's
can
not
point,
cheap, they're not cheap.
what we can point to was the estimate that we got to take the trees off the Dairy Queen lot. The estimate that we got was, for the town to do it, was $33,000.
Yeah, but this isn't talking about
No, I
dropping
mean,
and
this
falling.
is different,
Yeah,
but I mean,
yeah.
trees cost money.
Yep. And we have a beautiful tree resource that we really haven't been managing. It's just, with a little bit of exception of some limbing when the tree branches were hanging down or getting bad, we haven't been managing it, and we're not looking at it, but, well, I don't think we are, but, and that's what he's getting, and we haven't been doing it.
Maybe somewhere else where we can look to see if we can get some free advice. West Fraser, Toco, surely to God they're gonna have arborists on staff. Or, you know,
Really? Yeah, they probably don't have arborists.
well, you know, it might be,
They would have fellers.
It-
Yeah,
We're just
Yeah.
singing on the street.
yeah.
it's, I don't know, but it might be a place to
So,
ask.
as another alternative, not alternative, but I will reach out to the Arbor schools and see if there's interested students wanting to do a research project, and this would be a good research project and the like. So we'll do
Excellent.
Yeah.
some,
Talk to
investigation.
Women's College, maybe they've got some students or
Right.
courses.
They don't have anything on arborists like that, do that.
So the dark cloud in the sky, I just wanted to alert council to, is the functionality of the equipment that we have
Yeah.
for our base programs, whether it's tree trimming, Christmas lights, flag poles, or whatever. So right now, that is not in the 2023 capital forecast. And, you know, the equipment, I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but it could happen that there's a critical failure and we'll be scrambling.
But
But
that
we can
comes-
rent if we need.
That's
it.
right,
Right.
that's where it comes to rental, cause then you get the trained people, they'd have the fall arrest. If we get into that business, then we've gotta get that inspected yearly, all this other stuff. It's cheaper to rent it out for the amount of time we use that bucket.
And why can't we plan right now to equip both the flag poles or 3 poles that we have with the mechanism? You know, let's plan to equip all 3 of them the way they ought to be. So they have the police system. Or whatever the modern leading system is.
If I could, that is the plan, and we're hoping to do that with the existing allocations within the operating budget. So we do have a maintenance budget for facilities, and if there's any room, it will be undertaken within those allocations. So we're not, again, coming forward to council, asking for specific allocations to do things that hopefully we can manage internally to do, so.
Okay, so we went through that list of one-time projects. We've given the go-ahead for a couple, and we're waiting on a few also. Where to next?
Again, the next slide just articulates the contributions to reserves, and it seems like a huge amount of money. Relatively speaking, just to put it in perspective, using historical cost, and if you look at our financial statements, our depreciation allocation on historical cost is around 2.2 million a year. We're not near 2.2 million a year. Of course, there's other sources of funding to top the town's contributions up, such as MSI and the like. But again, that financial statement contribution is based on historical cost. So you really have to double it to deal with replacement cost and the like. But, you know, that's what it is. I know there was a study back to council recently on the reserve allocations and the like. I haven't reviewed that, but there may be some opportunities to look at rationalizing and optimizing the cash flow period as it relates to reserves, rather than, if you do it this way, then ownership really kicks in. That's my money. You can't use it for this, but you know, that from a staff perspective. So again, without the underlying data to say what's in a good state of repair, and that's all related to the asset management study. What are the priorities? Again, as I mentioned, the capital budget is a bit delayed because it was basically, here it is, council. I'm not prepared to do that quite yet with council. I want administration to try to sort it out. Here's at least high priorities, meeting on priorities, and if it's on the last third, you can probably defer it. You know what I mean? So that's what you'll be seeing at the next budget meeting on the capital side at least. The other items, if you wish to go through them, is again more detail on the strategic priorities in the appendices. Some of them have budgetary allocations, some of them don't. Some of them have staff resources assigned to undertake the work that has to happen related to them. Some of them have changed in scope in terms of town involvement as things have progressed over the last 6 months. So it's a mixed bag. There is a commitment by council to review this every quarter, and we'll gear that up for the next quarter. But unless there's some specific questions on what we can do in the budget, I'll leave it at that.
No, thank you for bringing that in. From my perspective, it does help me, because when I was looking at those priorities, there wasn't anything where we needed a lot of money allocated to it. So I think we're okay there. So, yeah, I'm good with that.
Just looking at the hospital site one, can we schedule a meeting with the Minister of Health just to light a fire under his ass, or her ass, whoever it happens to be?
Yeah, I mean, we could, but I think we're getting off topic, and let's stick with the budget at this one, and,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
because
Appreciate-
we can go into dog handler and all of that stuff.
We'll talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah. So, okay, so what's the next step budget-wise here?
Well, obviously, administration has to do a bit more work and come back with further questions. We are hopefully scheduling a presentation in camera dealing with compensation issues, or we will be. I have a draft of the external work that's been done. The consultant is fine tuning that. We'll be presenting that
Tomorrow.
information. Actually, it won't be ready for tomorrow based on our discussion today, so that will be off the agenda for tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
But we will, for the December 6th meeting, have that presentation there. If council wants, we could still have that in-camera meeting and I can give an update if council wishes
Sure.
that.
Give us a heads up of where it's looking like.
Yeah, and then we can, review it once it's in a better presentation format. Anyway, so I can brief council on camera tomorrow on that. That being said, we'll still be modeling, my sense is, the rate, all-inclusive, in terms of tax rate exposure, is looking to be, from my perspective, in the, 3.5% range right now, based on the discussions that I've heard to date. So that's likely where we'll end up. There's, that could be mitigated eventually once we know the assessment information and the like, but we're not gonna know that for a while. And then the capital budget, as I've alluded to, is, it's a substantial ask currently. We're hoping to mitigate and provide strategies of what are the high priority items versus the nice to do items, and present it on that basis on December 6th. Prior to November 6th, whatever the next council meeting is, tomorrow's, 2 weeks from tomorrow's council meeting,
It's actually 3 weeks.
3 weeks. So I can't remember what date the next council meeting is in.
It would,
But anyways, yeah, it's the December meeting.
So at that December meeting, there will be two specific reports from finance. One is the adoption of the interim budget, and one is the normal temporary borrowing bylaw. So those two items will be related to the budget, but it's basically administrative in nature to give us approval to spend money until the budget is actually adopted.
Yeah, it's the 13th.
Yeah, so at that December 13th meeting, there will be an interim budget there for council's approval, which will be predicated on half of last year's budget, basically. And that will give us the legislative authority to continue.
running it, yeah.
Yeah. And then, depending on how far we get on the 6th, that will inform when we can bring forward a final budget approval.
Okay. Anybody got any questions at this point? Any?
Were you going to bring back the number from the assessment, because you were talking about properties that properties of like a flat tax of $50 or $100 and some that didn't have that tax?
There was some talk about doing a minimum tax, property tax. So if you have a property, you have to pay at least $100 in property tax. If it's a vacant lot, some people might be paying less. We didn't know how many, so we'd asked them to look into that.
Sorry, I do have that information.
Oh, okay.
I just had it sitting under my chair, and I believe there's one other item that we're supposed to remind each other on, but maybe that will come to us. So in terms of the minimum tax based on the assessment, the good news is it wasn't as many properties as I thought it was, but over the last 2 years, the tax staff have been dealing with the assessor, and there was significantly more properties. So there was an issue of some that were assessed as farmland that have now been moved to other classes. So the list was much more extensive. Anyways, there's 20 properties right now. Of those 20 properties that are below the threshold, unfortunately, 7 are exempt properties. So it doesn't matter, we're not getting anything anyways. So of those properties, the taxes they're currently paying range from $4.92 to, on average, say around 15 or 20 bucks. So if a minimum tax was put in at $50, it will generate a couple dollars, but nothing significant, around $330. And if you go up to $100 as the minimum tax, which is quite common in all municipalities, most municipalities across province have a minimum tax, because it doesn't matter if the property's assessed at $1 or 100,000. We still have to do the mailings, we still have to administer the account, we still have to do that. The people are still using the road network, they're still, you know, anyways, it's just, so that's the general philosophy of a minimum tax. So if you go up to $100, of course, it's gonna be a sticker shock for those that are paying $5, but, you know, so that's really,
Can we scale it? Like do $50 this year and $100 next year?
council can, that's an annual decision council can make on setting the minimum tax in the bylaw. So you could start off at 50 and increase it 25 bucks a year till you feel comfortable. One of my colleagues was talking,
I was trying to think of what the other one was.
no, one of my colleagues who worked at another municipality advised me that their minimum tax was $500 a year.
For vacant lots and 1,000 for improvements.
Right, which is at the very high end, but it's, I would suggest that a minimum tax in the $75 to $150 range is pervasive in the province. So anyways, that's what it is.
I don't think you'll get any disagreement on that from most of council, I don't think, but maybe if you can bring an RFD, we could look at it.
Sure.
Like to one of the council meetings, yeah.
Like
Yeah,
tomorrow
that sounds
night?
good, never even had it in mind.
Why not tomorrow night, before the budget?
Well, it's not gonna make a big difference in the budget, it's $300, right?
Yeah, but that's
And the agenda's,
$300, so I pay for that arbitrator to come in.
But
and
we
come-
can't implement it for last year's budget, like for, yeah, as long as we have it for December 13th. December 13th, we could pass it and it could be in the fees bylaw for 2023.
December 6th is our budget meeting.
Yeah, but we could, but it, I mean, from a budget perspective, but as long as we have it passed before the end of the year, it could be applied to
That's right,
2023.
January 1st.
Yeah.
Starts tax season.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that
Technically,
means
as
that
long as
it
it's
doesn't
done-
have to be tomorrow, it could be December
I
13th.
think you're right, everyone's in agreement.
Yeah,
technically, it's as long as it's done and included in the tax rate bylaw, which won't be coming to council to the new year anyways.
Yeah.
That's fine. But again, in terms of transparency, it's great to get approval by council, then it's just incorporated into the master rates bylaw anyways, so.
yeah.
Who pays $5 in taxes?
Roll number
Yeah.
15, sorry, I don't
But
have,
this is commercial also, right? This is across the board, it's not just residential?
that's correct. So of those properties, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are residential and 7 are commercial.
Or our friends
Okay.
across the street, one of them?
Doesn't matter.
I just got the roll
Just
numbers,
put
so.
the bylaw in.
So you'd mentioned two things, that was one, and there was another thing that
I
came up.
think the other thing might have been the hospital, old hospital site,
Yeah,
that
so,
potential. Yeah, I was just reading something about that in the notes. When was I reading it?
Can we tax that this year? Cause it's
No.
not a hospital anymore.
so
Yeah, but.
perhaps
Okay.
I'll provide an update in camera tomorrow night on
Oh,
that
okay.
issue.
Okay,
There is some new information, but I need to confirm the information. So I'll endeavor to have a verbal report in camera tomorrow night on it.
okay, anything else from council for tonight? The one thing I was just wondering, we've got the open house coming up. Is there anything else we want to bring up? We talked about funding for grants and sponsorships. You know, what would people like to see there? Is there any other topics?
Where are you advertising this open house?
It's been on Facebook, it's been in the paper, and it's been in your newsletter. So I don't know, that's where we've got it. But nothing else, so, okay. Maybe we can, for the open house, we should come up with some wording of how we would like to, you know, to word a question to the public, because the wording can be very important to what kind of a response you get. Can we leave that with administration to come up with some wording for a question that's...
Well, why
Couldn't we just present this, this one slide saying this is where our sponsorship and donations are? What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. We can show them some data and say, you know, what do you think we should be at? And maybe we can show the people that we've given these grants out to over the last couple of years, so people can say, yeah, it's been, because last year was just one sample, but there's been, you know, in previous years, there's been other people that have been recipients of it.
well,
Okay, nothing else? With that, meeting adjourned.